We have an extremely experienced panel up here who have collectively worked on an untold number of company community dialogue processes, literally in every corner of the world. And I want to start by asking our panelists about all of the work that happens, all the challenges and the work that has to happen before getting parties to the table.
I think we have to recognize that when the CAO receives a complaint from communities, there's almost an immediate entry point to approach the company who has to let us in because of their agreements with the lending institution to talk to us and to, in some sense, give us the space to come in and explain what it is that we do and where appropriate and relevant to identify where dispute resolution potentially can be of assistance, and if not, obviously inform them of the compliance process. And so that convening power is incredibly useful and helpful. And when you don't have that convening power, it's often tricky to know how to access the private sector if you're coming in off the back of a complaint from a community. And get the space to start having a conversation and a dialogue with the company around what are the benefits of dispute resolution. Because it doesn't seem to me that the private sector at large rushes out to find third-party neutrals to help them resolve disputes. And I think often it's because perhaps they don't have a taste for it, they haven't seen and understood how that can work. They might lack the capacity to actually do that, depending on their scale. And having said that, when the CAO receives a complaint and goes in, one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, if we get the go-ahead for a dispute resolution process, how do we make sure that parties are committed to participating in good faith and they're not using the dispute resolution process as a smokescreen to ward off a compliance appraisal, for example, or to ward off court action? And so some of the aspects that we need to look out for as a CAO very, very carefully is during the assessment of the complaint to start identifying what are the interests underpinning this complaint.
Oftentimes I think assessments stir up trouble, but they do it if they're well done, they do it in a constructive way. On the community side, I think we spend a good deal of time trying to understand who is directly and visibly representing the community or members of the community on an issue. And then we also need to look at the question of how others in the community perceive that leadership and whether there are others who either would like themselves to be in a representative role or who challenge directly the claimed leadership of others in the community. And as neutrals coming in to try and understand this and try and, through assessment, articulate a path forward, or at least a set of options for a community, we sometimes get very directly sucked into prolonged and difficult disputes or differences in a political sense within that community, and we need to help them in some sense to identify and deal with those issues if there are going to be constructive ways forward. On the company side, I think it's also really interesting that, let's put it this way, both vertically from headquarters down to operations and field level and across the field levels, company representatives who are primarily focused on community relations, those who are primarily focused on operational issues, on getting infrastructure built, on getting the resource extracted, and those who have sometimes a government relations function. You need also to address those internal dynamics and to ensure, both, as Gina said, I think, that there are company representatives who can credibly and in good faith represent the company in that process, and also help them start to address some of their own internal puzzles.
We need to shift from the perspective of the business, which means the project, and to think on the perspectives of local development of the people. For instance, if you go to a community which is a greenfield where before they had no experience to dealing with oil and gas or whatever the activity is, they know little if nothing about that activity. They don't do They don't know about the risks and the possibilities that this business has. So if you go in the very early stage, you empower the people, and you let the people know much better what are the opportunities this new business may have for their life, and then they start learning how to adapt and to watch if this is a true opportunity for them to come along the life cycle.
When it started in 2005, and we were called upon to facilitate the negotiation between Chevron and the communities, we really didn't do much capacity building. And the first one we did took about 7 to 8 months, before we could get agreement. But in 2008, we had a different model, and we did this with CBI. We had capacity building done in terms of providing training to both parties on negotiation skills, and we saw a significant impact. So it was extremely useful. Now, the model that we were looking at was a model that was trying to empower the community members in the development process itself. And in the first 3 years, it was very clear that a major constraint and challenge to the process was the capacity of the community leaders to actually do development, to take the kinds of decisions that they were required to take. And since 2009, thereabout, there has been a program that's building the capacity of these community members and the leaders in those things, And we've seen significant improvement, and that is a major component of the GMOU, and I think going forward is going to be that. What we need to do is to assure ourselves that the capacity building that is being given actually is leading to development on the ground.
Also on the company side, that I would say relative to even 10 years ago, we are seeing a global shift among the leading multinationals in the extractive sector, and I won't go beyond that because my expertise doesn't extend beyond that. But in the extractive sector, we are seeing the leading multinationals, not uniformly, but significant groundswell, raising the corporate profile of not just CSR broadly, but stakeholder engagement, and even more specifically community engagement, and raising the professional status and support for people doing work with their community stakeholders in different operational sites and exploration sites. This is an uneven process, and it's one that draws criticism when companies claim more than they've actually achieved, when there are disputes internal to the company between the folks doing the community relations work and the folks trying to get the resource out of the ground or out of the country. And yet, those with this commitment are actively seeking support to build their own staff capacity to do this work better. And I would say overall, I think that is an encouraging trend, and one that, that communities and folks in the NGO community should welcome, although not necessarily expecting dramatic change overnight. And I do think there's a role for those of us who are predominantly neutrals, but who also have experience to offer and expertise to offer, to help them build that capacity in the same way that we work globally with some of our NGO partners to help bring effective negotiation skills to communities.
I think the starting point really is to craft agreements that have a monitoring and implementation function within them. In other words, identify who's going to be responsible for that and where are the resources going to come for that enforcement. When you're crafting the agreement, you have to have a long-term vision of how sustainable is the outcome, and I think you have to be prepared to commit resources to building capacity where capacity is needed.
In many of the cases, it's very hard to engage the government. For instance, in the case of Tintaya, the communities didn't trust the government. It was the Fujimori era. And the company also said, okay, we better go along, communities and companies, without the government. But it's not sustainable in the long term. If we think how is the impact of a mining activity or another activity, it's a long-term venue, it's a long-term business. It's shape and give the opportunity for a community, for a country to grow in the good or the less good way for 100 years. The question is, how can we go from case by case to a systematic approach? And that's the key question.
Yeah.
It's when things were very bad, and you get a little improvement, you get a feeling that, oh, okay, I think we have arrived. We're already there. And one has to be extremely careful because you need to continue to monitor and evaluate and assure yourself that what you are doing is actually achieving the objectives. So it is a process that you need to work on, continuously. We have actually put in place a review every 3 years to ensure that we monitor what is happening.
Just the last thing I would say is we need to approach this question of resilience with a lot of humility. We cannot neither we nor any stakeholder can engineer a foolproof, a future-proof system or structure. But what we can do, I think what is realistic, is to make sure, as in the case that Prof mentioned of the periodic evaluation, that there is active ongoing reflection on how well we are doing at meeting unanticipated challenges and what we could do to prepare ourselves better. And that works on every level, from the core question of who's going to represent us down the road, where will young people be, to what are we going to do when this operation shuts down? Are we on a pathway so that 20 years from now, or 10 or 5, when this operation is no longer present, when the stream of revenue from this operation is no longer present, that we've got some kind of livelihood base, some kind of economic development strategy for the longer run? That shouldn't be only the job of the community and the company. It should also be the job of government, but at a minimum, the community and the company need to be looking at it.